Schuman Centre just a think tank. And of course, all the directors would say, no, no, no. Our research is cutting edge in our discipline. We do both, right?
How do you know the work you're doing is cutting edge?
Having such a rich network of researchers and being able to kind of learn from each other is as valuable as the data sets that we have.
At the Schuman Centre, interdisciplinarity turns out to be a huge bonus. It helps you to be able better to understand what other people are saying and what is the importance of the argument, and also to begin to think about how it can be put to use even in the most tumultuous environment that you can imagine. Thank you guys so much for showing up. This is a great opportunity for us to talk about what we do at the Robert Schuman Centre, and it's also a great opportunity to learn more about what you guys are up to, right? So I guess the first question is how did you get to the Robert Schuman Centre? What were you thinking when you came?
It's a really funny story.
Well, as I applied, I had just finished or was working on a Europeanization project. So it was, I mean, working with the Schuman Centre, of course, was an obvious affinity for me. That was that was a long time ago, 95.
Oh, wow. And the Europeanization project was a project that you continued working on afterwards?
Oh, yes. For like another about 8 years, right? With money from the Leibniz Prize from Germany, Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, which then I could hire a lot of students coming here, doing their PhD and working on Europeanization of national policies.
And that was at the start of the Europeanization debate, right?
Yes, very at the start. We were actually the first ones to start with the entire issue, how our member states' policies affected by European legislation.
You, Iva?
I mean, I had this comment when you asked this question. It made me reflect how somehow funny my story is, because I came here to study, to work on the research on media pluralism, but also more on digital transformation of what media actually is and what the democratic role of media is, and especially on platform governance. But the way I came, or the channel through which I found this job, was actually Facebook. So there is a paradox in it, or there is a destiny in it, right? I came here to study Facebook among all the other big tech companies, finding an ad for a position through Facebook. And this was around 10 years ago.
And what was the attraction? What made this place more interesting than other possibilities?
I think I personally, as a researcher, I'm very interdisciplinary and I'm very curious. And I'm always very interested in exploring other disciplines, related or closer, but also there are ones that are more distant. And the attraction point for me was this interdisciplinarity and the fact that we have a small team within the Schuman Centre that does research on media pluralism, and yet at the same time we have very diverse team in terms of disciplines that we cover. So we have economists, lawyers, political scientists, and communication scientists. And I think this really shows the attraction of the Schuman at large.
But when you showed up, Adrienne, the Schuman Centre was a small team.
It was very small. It was very small. Then it grew and grew and grew. And across the various directors, which I've seen, right, with you, now the present one, and it has been enormously successful, right, in this cooperation between different disciplines at high level, also in publications, but also at a very everyday level as well. I remember during the financial crisis, for instance, we had always lunches, political scientists, historians with Giancarlo Cossetti in the Convento in the sun and discussing the financial problems, for instance. But then, of course, what is a particular feature also of the Schuman Centre in this cooperation, not only between disciplines, but between scholars, university scholars, all of us, right, which then work with people from the institutions, the Commission, the European Parliament, the Council, comitology, and but also, of course, with stakeholders. And the stakeholders in industry, which then led actually with external fundraising, extremely successful external fundraising by the directors of the Schuman Centre, led to this formation of structures which are still there. The schools of regulation, in energy, of course, very big, finance, banking, communication, migration, and these are structures that are still there, and they are funded with external money, which was raised, which was a great achievement, I think. Of course, one has to say that there were also sometimes tensions in the cooperation between those from the institutions, that is Commission and Parliament, and the stakeholders, because we always would say also, the question was, is then the Schuman Centre just a think tank? And of course, all the directors would say, no, no, no. Our research is cutting edge in our discipline. We do both, right? We do cutting edge research in our disciplines and cooperate, but also make our policy oriented, propose policy solutions.
Make it useful.
Yes.
I would say make it useful. So this is the real DNA of the Schuman Centre, right? I mean, I think
Yes.
these bridges between disciplines, but also bridges between the institutions or policy making and research, but then also with stakeholders, different stakeholders. And I think increasingly citizens as stakeholders. And I think this is also a point of attraction with the Schuman Centre, because I personally, and the team that I work with, but most people I interact with at the Schuman Centre as well, are daily kind of posing and asking this question, why are we doing this? Who are we doing this for? And I think this kind of reflection in academia is crucial nowadays when everything is so much in flux, and we are even losing the ground with basic concepts that we've been operating with across our disciplines. So I think the way to kind of redefine those key concepts, it needs to be done in a slightly different way, a bit more inclusive, more open and more plural that perhaps was done in the past. And I think Schuman Centre is the best place to do that kind of research.
Certainly, you know, when I made the decision to come, I came obviously with the benefit of having had 4 predecessors who did brilliant work and laid the foundations that you described. But when I came from a policy school, and I was trained in an interdisciplinary fashion. Professionally, that was really difficult to sell at other institutions, right? I mean, I always pretended to be an economist with political scientists and a political scientist with economists, just in the hope that nobody would catch on. But at the Schuman Centre, this interdisciplinarity turns out to be a huge bonus. It helps you to be able better to understand what other people are saying and what is the importance of the argument, and also to begin to think about how it can be put to use even in the most tumultuous environment that you can imagine, right? You know, when Lord knows we're living in a tumultuous environment right now. But I want to come back to this idea of cutting edge research, right? I mean, how do you know the work you're doing is cutting edge?
Well, you would, of course, try to use the developments in analysis and in theorization, in conceptualization, which are up to the present standard, the most recent work. So you have to keep informed all the time and reading widely, but also linking it to empirical problems, right? The analytical tools, but also the theories which are being developed, and then asking what does it actually mean for a particular empirical problem I'm interested in from a research perspective, but also because it's policy relevant to find solutions for a particular policy problem. And that's in a way trying to link those two, which is not always easy if you have this type of tripartite research, because stakeholders would say, but we would like to have our answer very quickly to a particular problem of energy transportation, for instance. And the institutions would say, but we would like to have the results for the analysis of the EP elections in no time, before we even have done a careful analysis, right, put it in a theoretical context, right, of what parliamentary elections mean for whom, which member states, or the European institutions, etc., etc. So the timelines are different, right? We take a long time in doing careful research, cutting-edge research, which is theoretically guided, empirically founded, methodologically sound, etc. and that's relatively slow. So there are also tensions in doing that, right?
Do you have the same experience?
I do. I mean, it's very difficult to keep up with the needs of policymaking world nowadays, especially in this field of digital governance and technology developments, and then also societal implications of that technology. So we are kind of pushed and forced, maybe it's not a good expression, but in a way there is a big need and hunger for academic knowledge, for evidence in that policymaking process. And it's not easy to produce and provide that evidence, because providing solid, sound academic evidence takes time. And then there is this additional challenge that I think links with cutting-edge research on these constantly evolving and rapidly shifting areas, is the fact that we are struggling with old methods. So we need to kind of invent new methods. We also need to be a bit more creative in thinking of how to apply existing concepts to studying that new and very fluid world, which is becoming very much interconnected in different aspects. That was not really the case before. And I think also the way the policy world works nowadays is not, actually the institutions are not super prepared for that, because they are still very compartmentalized. And actually the challenges or the issues that we're facing with are there cross-cutting. And so it really requires a lot of efforts on both sides. And I think as being a researcher, this is very inspiring and it's very motivating somehow to try to deal with these complex issues. And I think that's what's cutting edge in all this. At the same time, there is also a big risk of informing policy with weak evidence. So I think we also need to be very mindful that really quality research does take time, and sometimes it's better to be slow than to be wrong.
But you guys sit at the heart of a massive original data collection exercise, right? The Media Pluralism Monitor. And it's just one of many that we have at the Robert Schuman Centre. We have the Global Citizenship Program, we have EU&I, which is a voting advice application that harvests an enormous amount of data across the EU and EUI member states. And I guess, you know, when you talk about cutting edge, I think you're absolutely right, Adrienne, that it has to combine all of these elements. But the fact that we engage in such massive data collection and curation just to set the stage for an original analysis is something that I think people don't really recognize, right?
Indeed, it's really unprecedented, the pool of data that we have on media systems in Europe, in the European Union, but also in candidate countries. And I think also the way we collect this data also speaks about the nature of the Robert Schuman Centre and the projects we do here, is because we do this through a network of national researchers in all the countries that we cover. So also when we discuss methodology, when we discuss theoretical concepts that we are operating with, we are, again, I'm going to use this word plurality quite a lot probably. It's also because pluralism is at the core of what we do. But I think for research of today, especially for comparative research, opening this space for more input from unusual places and spaces, geographies, but also areas is crucial, is really important. Because if you think, most of the concepts that we've been operating with were defined and developed in the West, in the more developed academic parts of the world. But they didn't really work well for maybe Central Eastern parts of Europe. And now they seem not to work well also for some Western parts of the world where they were developed. So I think when we find ourselves in a situation of such contradictions and things are changing rapidly and we are losing grounds in many aspects, having such a rich network of researchers and being able to kind of learn from each other and develop or re-establish things in a different way is as valuable as the data sets that we have, because the data is fuel, data is important, but we also need to have frameworks, analytical frameworks, theoretical frameworks to make meaning out of that data, to understand and read that data, to extract value from that data. And I think to do that, having these kind of research networks is also essential.
I mean, that's a perfect pivot, Iva, to go back to you, Adrienne, because it wasn't just Europeanization that you developed at the Robert Schuman Centre, but you were also part, if I'm not mistaken, of the new modes of governance project. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the theoretical developments that came out?
Well, of course, I think kind of putting a lot of emphasis on these multi-level governance questions in the context of the European Union and beyond, of course, and the European Union in an international context is absolutely crucial, right? To develop questions, empirical problems to deal with, but linking them back to general questions, right? That is, theoretical questions. How do the different levels of governing impact upon each other? And how do they feed back then in the solution of particular problems, concrete problems? For instance, I would just mention an article I've been working on recently, which is developing agency of the European Union in the situation now of the war of Russia against Ukraine. How does kind of the European Union develop agency in security and defense? And doing that and kind of looking at the overall analytical approaches which you can have to use or can use, like transactionalism, but also kind of world island kind of approach, which means the old Atlantic Alliance, or the three hemispheres kind of approach, which is, you realize that the analytical lenses are very different, and then that different areas of action overlap very much with security and defense. It would be financial markets, of course. It would be energy. You get into all types of policy areas which show how enormously complex it is to govern this, right? And how do the European actors now react in the face of this challenge, right? Building up their capacity and capabilities and linking up to, the work of having the new kind of lateralism, or it's called different ways, right? Not multilateralism, but plural kind of orders that needs, of course, you need to kind of come up with needs of policy measures and forming of alliances and networks in order to deal with these problems which we are facing. So that's complex, keeps us on our feet all the time, theoretically, analytically, but also with an enormous amount of data, where we need, of course, data from all over the world, really.
Yeah, but I think also we should acknowledge another aspect of the Schuman Centre that has a lot to do also with your contribution as the director to the Schuman Centre, and that's the communication. I remember when we first collaborated within the Schuman Centre, it was the change of the research agenda, like the way we present our research to the stakeholders, but also to the world. And I really like that approach that the Schuman Centre is investing increasingly in science communication, because it needs to reach those that are interested in what we're doing here, but also should be or could be potentially interested in what we're doing here. And you did implement a lot of things along those lines, no?
Well, I'm grateful for your saying that, but I have to admit, you guys have brought examples of both kinds of communication, right? Adrienne, you're reading this wonderful manuscript by Stefano Bartolini that addresses what is a fundamental theoretical problem. And you've brought a book from the Media Pluralism Monitor that takes that kind of fundamental insight and transmits it into the policy community. And I think if there was one major distinguishing feature, that would be it. The ability to speak in all those registers at the same time and to provide value on the basis of this research. I can't thank you guys enough for joining us in this conversation. It's been great. It's been great to hear what you're doing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.